On a cold Thursday evening outside my son's shed, my daughter-in-law looked at me with contempt and said, "You came here to live off us, so having a place to sleep is already a blessing." My son lowered his head and whispered, "Mom, just stay out there for a few days." Then she stepped forward and kicked my leg, making me stumble toward the shed door. The door slammed shut with a sharp creak. That was when my test of their true hearts was complete. "I am so grateful you chose to stay. Now I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this? Your city, your country? Drop it below. You are part of what makes Silent Revenge with Auntie May worth showing up for. One thing to know, some elements of this story are fictional, added for depth and storytelling. Names and settings are coincidental, but the wisdom woven through every word is something worth keeping. The night they put me in the shed, the temperature dropped to 51 degrees. I know because I checked my phone at 2 in the morning, lying on a mattress that smelled like motor oil and old canvas, listening to the lawnmower 2 feet away creak as the air shifted. Outside, I could hear Kendra's heels clicking across the patio stones, sharp, precise, like a metronome counting down something I hadn't named yet. I pressed my hand flat against the tin wall, cold as a filing cabinet, cold as the expression on my daughter-in-law's face the moment she realized I had nothing left to give her. I almost laughed out loud. She had no idea. Let me start at the beginning, the real beginning. James died on a Thursday in January, 14 months before any of this happened. Lung cancer, the kind that moves fast and apologizes to no one. We had 39 years together, James and I. 39 years of building Caldwell Property Group from one rental duplex in Glendale into something neither of us ever expected it to become. He was the dreamer. I was the one who read the fine print. When he passed, I was the only one who knew the full picture. The 5 property rows in Pasadena, the LLC accounts, the penthouse on Figueroa we bought when riverfront property was still undervalued, and everyone thought we were being reckless. James always said riverfront was the right bet. He was right about most things. I didn't tell Tristan any of it. That was a deliberate choice James and I had made together years before he got sick. We had watched too many families come apart over inheritance expectations. Adult children who stopped trying because they assumed a windfall was coming. We didn't want that for our son. So when James died, I grieved quietly in the house on Marigold Lane, and Tristan grieved the way men like him grieve, by staying busy, by checking in on weekends, by bringing flowers I didn't need and casseroles I couldn't finish. Then the calls started changing. About 8 months after the funeral, Tristan began mentioning things. The neighborhood around Marigold Lane was appreciating fast. Property values up nearly 30% in 18 months. "That house is worth close to $1 million now, Mom, maybe more." He said it the way people say things when someone else has written the script for them, just slightly off, like a word mispronounced in a language you're still learning. I heard Kendra in the background one evening, her voice carrying perfectly through the phone, even though she wasn't holding it. "Tell her we want her here with us, Tristan. Tell her it's not about the money. We genuinely want to take care of her." I hadn't mentioned money, not once. I set my coffee cup down very carefully on the kitchen counter, the same counter James had leaned against every morning for 39 years, badly making coffee, with entirely too much enthusiasm. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the empty space where he used to stand. Then I picked up the phone and called Dennis Hartwell. Dennis had been our attorney since the early days of the LLC estate planning property law, 30 years of knowing exactly where every asset lived and what protected it. He answered on the second ring. "Dennis," I said, "I need you to help me set something up before I go anywhere near that house." He didn't ask me to explain. That's one of the things I have always appreciated about Dennis. He simply said, "Tell me what you need, Rowena." I looked out the kitchen window at the garden James had planted the spring before his diagnosis roses. He never saw bloom a second time. "I need to find out," I said, "whether my son loves me or whether he loves what he thinks I'm worth." Dennis Hartwell worked fast when he needed to. Within 48 hours of my call, he had drafted a 10-year lease agreement for the Marigold Lane property, signed, notarized, and recorded with the Los Angeles County Recorder's Office. Gary Sutton, who had managed my properties for 11 years, would serve as the primary contact for the tenant. The rental income would flow quietly into an account Kendra didn't know existed, the way most important things in my life flowed quietly and completely out of sight. Once this is recorded, Dennis told me sitting across from me at his desk on Wilshire Boulevard, that property cannot be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without the tenant's written consent for 10 years. Anyone who tries to pressure you into liquidating it will be pressing against a wall. Good, I said. Let them press. He also prepared a 3-day notice to pay or quit addressed to Tristan, a legal requirement under California Civil Code, Section 1161, formally notifying a tenant of overdue rent obligations. The notice was dated 11 days before I planned to arrive. Dennis had hand-delivered it to Tristan's office under the letterhead of a property management firm, not his own, describing it as routine annual notification for all tenants of Caldwell Property Group Holdings. Tristan had signed the acknowledgement without reading past the first paragraph. He told me later he assumed it was something administrative that did not concern him. He was not entirely wrong about that. It simply concerned him more than he realized. By the time I walked through their front door with my 3 suitcases, that notice would already be ticking down like a quiet clock in the background, invisible to everyone but Dennis and me. I packed carefully. 3 suitcases, old ones, the kind with scuffed corners and broken zipper pulls that I kept in the back of the hallway closet. I chose clothes that were comfortable and plain. I left my good jewelry in the penthouse safe. I left my laptop, my financial documents, everything that might suggest a woman who had anything worth protecting. What I brought was a 67-year-old widow with 3 battered suitcases and a story about a lease she had signed without thinking it through. Tristan arrived Sunday morning in his black SUV, freshly washed, smelling of the expensive cologne Kendra bought him for Christmas. He hugged me at the door, and for a moment I felt his arms tighten the way they used to when he was small, and the world felt too large. My chest ached with something I refused to let reach my face. "You're gonna love it, Mom," he said, loading the suitcases into the trunk. "Kendra's been getting your room ready all week." I nodded and looked out the window the whole drive over. Kendra met us at the front door in a cream-colored blouse and her best smile, the one that showed all her teeth and none of what was behind them. She took both my hands in hers and squeezed. "Rowena, we are so glad you're finally here. This is going to be so good for all of us." There it was. All of us. Not you. All of us. I smiled back at her, warm and tired, the way a 67-year-old widow is supposed to smile. Then I delivered the line I had rehearsed in the car. "I need to tell you both something," I said, setting my purse on the entryway table. "About the house on Marigold Lane." I paused, letting my expression fold into something that looked like embarrassment. "I signed a long-term lease agreement with a tenant, 10 years. The rental income went to pay off some old debts James left behind. I didn't realize what I was signing until it was already recorded." I shook my head slowly. "I'm afraid I can't sell it, and there's nothing left from it. I came here with just myself." The smile on Kendra's face didn't disappear. It did something worse. It flickered just for a half second, like a light bulb losing power, and then came back brighter than before, stretched too wide, working too hard. "Oh, that's completely fine," she said, her voice one careful note higher than natural. "That doesn't change anything. Your family." I picked up my purse and followed Tristan down the hallway. Family, she had said. I filed that word away next to all the others. It took Kendra 4 days to drop the performance entirely. 4 days of stiff smiles at the breakfast table, of "let me know if you need anything, Rowena," delivered in the tone of someone who very much hoped I would not need anything. 4 days of watching her film TikTok videos in the living room while I sat in the sunroom with my book and my cup of tea, careful not to walk into the frame, careful not to exist too loudly in a house that had never actually been open to me. On the 5th day, she decided she needed the living room for a permanent studio setup. It was Thursday evening. The sun was already sinking behind the eucalyptus trees along the back fence, and the air had that particular edge that Pasadena gets in early October, cool enough to remind you that warmth is not guaranteed. I was standing near the kitchen doorway when I heard her heels first. That sharp, deliberate click across the patio, stone's the kind of sound that is designed to announce itself. Kendra stepped out into the backyard in a cream silk blouse and pointed mules, her chin lifted just enough to make clear that what was about to happen had already been decided. Rowena. She said my name the way you address someone who works for you. Not a greeting, a summons. The living room needs to be my filming studio now. You've lived out in the country your whole life, you're used to roughing it. I already cleaned out the shed in the backyard. There's an old mattress in there. You'll get plenty of fresh air out there, and you won't be tracking dirt all over my hardwood floors. And honestly, she tilted her head, her smile sharpening at the edges. You came here with nothing living off our goodwill. Having any roof over your head should feel like a blessing. My heart slammed once against my ribs, hard, the kind of impact that radiates outward and takes a moment to settle. Before I could draw breath to respond, she stepped forward. The pointed tip of her mule connected with my shin, sharp, deliberate, not an accident. Pain shot up my leg like a current, and I stumbled backward against the shed door, my shoulder hitting the wooden frame. Then she bent down, gripped both my suitcases by their handles, and shoved them hard across the concrete into the darkness inside. I gripped the door frame to steady myself. My shin throbbed. My eyes stung, not from tears, from the shock of it, from the specific sensation of being handled, like something without feelings, without history, without 39 years of building a life that could buy this entire neighborhood twice over. Tristan stood near the back steps, his shoulders curved inward, his eyes fixed on the ground. He cleared his throat. Mom, just go along with it for a few days. If Kendra gets upset, she stops cooking for me. The shed door swung shut. I stood in the dark and listened to her heels click back across the patio until they disappeared inside. From the other side of the back fence, I heard a sound, a quiet intake of breath. I looked up. Through the gap in the oleander hedge, Maggie Carroll stood perfectly still on her side of the property line, a garden trowel in one hand, her eyes wide. She had seen everything. She gave me one small, tight nod, the kind of nod that means, I see you and I will not forget what I just saw. I nodded back. Then I sat down on the edge of the mattress, pressed my palm against my throbbing shin, and reached for my phone. Dennis answered before the second ring finished. The test has its first result, I said. Start the clock. I woke up at 5:45 the next morning because the shed had no insulation, and the October air had decided to make that perfectly clear. My shin was bruised, a deep wine-colored mark the size of a silver dollar, and my lower back ached from the mattress, which had apparently been designed for storing gardening equipment rather than sleeping human beings. I sat up, slowly pressed both palms to my knees, and took stock of where I was and what I was going to do about it. The answer, as it turned out, came knocking at 7:30. Kendra appeared at the shed door in her athleisure set, and her content creator energy, that particular brightness people perform when they are about to film themselves doing something generous. She pushed the door open without knocking. Rowena, I need you to go through those boxes along the wall and pull out anything we can donate. The neighborhood's doing a charity garage sale this morning on Elm Court, and I want to get some footage of us contributing. She gestured at the stacked boxes behind me. Old clothes, old things, whatever. Just make a pile by 8. She was already walking back toward the house before I answered. I looked at the boxes. Then I looked at the door to the living room, Kendra's new studio, which she had left open in her hurry. Through it, I could see the built-in wardrobe along the far wall, the one she kept her premium pieces in. The structured blazers, the designer handbags lined up like soldiers and hanging at the very end, encased in a clear garment bag. Her limited edition leather jacket, the one she had mentioned twice, cost $5,000. The one she had worn in her most viewed video to date. My eyes were not what they used to be. I made my way inside, moving slowly, carefully, the way a 67-year-old woman with a bruised shin and tired eyes moves through a house that is not hers. I sorted through the wardrobe with genuine concentration, pulling items one by one. A blouse here, a scarf there, and the leather jacket which my aging eyes somehow failed to distinguish from the rest of the pile. By 8:15, I had carried everything to the folding tables on Elm Court 3 houses down, where half the neighborhood was already browsing. Everything priced at $10. Clean, simple, no exceptions. Maggie Carroll arrived at 8:20 with her reading glasses and her canvas tote bag. She moved along the table with the focus of a woman who took bargain hunting seriously. Her hand closed around the leather jacket before I had finished setting out the last box. "Oh, this is gorgeous," she said, holding it up. "Real leather." "I believe so," I said. She had her $10 out before I finished the sentence. By 8:30, she was wearing it. Kendra came down the sidewalk at 8:45 in full ring light makeup phone, mounted on its gimbal ready to film her charitable moment. She stopped walking when she saw Maggie Carroll. Her face did something extraordinary, a full-body freeze, the kind that starts at the eyes and travels downward. "That jacket," she said. Her voice came out stripped of its usual polish, raw. "Where did you get that jacket?" Maggie Carroll looked down at herself, then back up at Kendra with the calm expression of a woman who had lived in this neighborhood for 22 years and did not intimidate easily. "Your table, sweetheart. $10. Charity sale." She smiled pleasantly. "Would you like a receipt?" 2 other neighbors had stopped to watch. A third pulled out her phone. Kendra's jaw tightened until the muscle near her ear visibly flexed. "That wasn't supposed to be in the donation pile. I need it back." Maggie did not move. Her smile did not waver. "Honey," she said loud enough for everyone present to hear clearly, "you cannot open a charity sale, take people's money, and then demand returns. That is not how charity works. That is not how any of this works." I stood 2 tables away, straightening a stack of books that did not need straightening, and said absolutely nothing. Kendra walked back into the house without her jacket and without her composure, and I knew from the particular way she slammed the kitchen door, controlled enough to avoid breaking anything hard enough to make the window rattle, that she was already building her next move. I found out what it was 40 minutes later. She came to the shed with her ring light on a portable stand, her phone on its gimbal, and a wheelchair she had apparently located in the garage, an old one probably left by the previous owners with a torn vinyl seat and one wheel that pulled slightly to the left. "I need you to sit in this," she said, positioning the chair in the patch of afternoon sunlight just outside the shed door. Her voice had recovered its professional warmth, smooth and deliberate, as poured caramel. "I'm going live to address some misunderstandings from this morning. I just need you in the background. You don't have to say anything." I looked at the wheelchair. I looked at her ring light. I looked at the gimbal. "Of course," I said. I sat down. She went live at 12:47. Within 6 minutes, the viewer count climbed past 20,000. By 10 minutes in, it was pushing 50,000 people drawn by the algorithm, by the drama already circulating from the morning, by simple curiosity about what a life coach looks like when she is fighting for her reputation in real time. Kendra was good at this. I will give her that. She stood in front of the camera with her hand pressed to her heart and her eyes bright with manufactured emotion, talking about family, about sacrifice, about what it truly means to open your home to someone you love. "This is my mother-in-law, Rowena," she said, gesturing toward me with the practiced grace of a woman who had done 100 brand partnerships. "She's been struggling since losing her husband. We brought her here because family takes care of family. That is what we do. That is who we are." 51,000 viewers. I shifted in the wheelchair. My shin still throbbed where her mule had connected with it the night before. My lower back ached from the mattress. I thought about James, about the patience he used to talk about the kind that is not passive but deliberate, the kind that waits for exactly the right moment and then moves with everything it has. I stood up, not dramatically, not with a speech prepared. I simply placed both hands on the armrests, pushed myself upright, and walked steadily normally, with the easy gait of a woman whose legs work perfectly well, directly toward the camera. I smiled and gave a small, cheerful wave. "Thank you so much, sweetheart," I said, my voice warm and carrying clearly into the microphone. Being locked in that cold tin shed overnight really did wonders for my bad leg. I feel better than I have in months. You are so thoughtful. For exactly 2 seconds, Kendra did not move. Then the comments section detonated. I watched the numbers scroll in the corner of her screen as I walked back toward the shed. Hundreds of comments per second, the sentiment entirely unmistakable. Kendra's hand dropped from her heart. Her carefully constructed expression cracked down the middle like old plaster, and underneath it was something I had not seen on her face before. Not anger, not calculation, but something rawer and considerably less controlled. She ended the stream. Through the back fence, I could see Maggie Carroll on her patio phone in hand, already sharing the clip to what I imagined was every group chat she belonged to. Kendra stood in the yard with the ring light still blazing beside her, illuminating nothing useful, and stared at her follower count dropping in real time. I went inside. The shed sat on the edge of the mattress and poured myself a cup of tea from the thermos I had started keeping there on day 2. Some things I thought you simply cannot script your way out of. By 10 o'clock that night, Kendra had lost 43,000 followers and apparently decided that what the situation called for was bass-heavy music and a garbage problem. I heard the first trash bag hit the concrete outside the shed door at 10:12, then a second, then the particular scraping sound of someone dragging a large bin across patio stones with more force than the task required. The music started at 10:15, a pounding rhythmic kind of sound that traveled directly through the tin walls and settled somewhere behind my back molars. I lay on the mattress and let it wash over me for a moment. Then I reached for my phone. James had co-founded the Pasadena Hills HOA board 11 years ago, back when the neighborhood was transitioning and half the residents didn't know their property rights from their property lines. He had helped fund the development of the HOA Citizen app, a reporting system that allowed residents to document violations with time-stamped photos, GPS coordinates, and automatic routing to the city's code enforcement office. He had been proud of that app. He had called it Democracy with a Paper Trail. I opened it now. The camera on my phone was steady. I photographed the trash bags piled against the shed door, 3 large, black, clearly residential waste bags left in an area that was not a designated collection point in violation of Section 4 of the HOA Waste Management Bylaws. Then I switched to video and recorded 45 seconds of audio, the music clear and unmistakable, at a volume that my phone's meter registered well above the community threshold, time-stamped at 10:17 p.m. I attached the GPS coordinates of the property. I typed a brief factual description. I submitted the report. Then I poured the last of my thermos tea, lay back down, and read until I fell asleep. At 7:03 the following morning, someone rang the front doorbell with the particular persistence of a person who is being paid to be there and has nowhere else to be. I was already awake. Through the shed's small side window, I watched a white HOA enforcement vehicle parked at the curb, and beside it, a city waste management truck idling with patient authority. Kendra answered the door in a silk sleep mask pushed up onto her forehead, her expression moving rapidly through confusion, irritation, and then a dawning specific kind of dread. The HOA officer, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, named on his badge as R. Goodwin, held out a citation without ceremony. "Ma'am, noise violation under California Civil Code Section 4710 documented at 10:17 p.m. last night. Residential waste disposal in an unauthorized area documented at the same time. Combined fine is $500 due within 30 days. He nodded toward the trash bags still stacked against the shed. "You'll need to clear those now. If they're not moved in 30 minutes, the city truck will handle it and bill the property an additional $1,000 for emergency collection services." Kendra's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Someone reported me. Officer Goodwin looked at her with the expression of a man who had heard this sentence many times and found it no more compelling with repetition. 30 minutes, ma'am. I watched from the shed window as Kendra pulled on a pair of rubber gloves, the kind she used for face masks and avocado treatments, and began, one bag at a time, dragging the trash to the correct collection area on the side of the house. Maggie Carroll appeared on her front porch at 7:15 with a mug of coffee, dressed all ready as though she had set an alarm specifically for this. She raised her mug in a small, satisfied salute toward my window. I raised my thermos back. A woman who has just paid a $500 HOA fine and spent 40 minutes moving trash bags in rubber gloves has two choices. She can sit with what happened, or she can immediately begin planning something that will make her feel powerful again. Kendra was not the sitting type. By 9:30 that morning, she was on the phone with Sandra Hargrove, chairwoman of the Pasadena Hills PTA, inviting her and 6 other mothers to a backyard BBQ luncheon. Just a casual gathering. I heard her say through the kitchen window, her voice fully restored to its warm, professional register. I've been meaning to do something special for the community. Come at noon. She appeared at the shed door at 10:15 with a Costco bag, the large brown paper kind, which she dropped just inside the entrance without stepping in. I need you to cook, she said. Grill's already on. Use everything in the bag. She looked at her manicured nails rather than at me. These are important people. Make it look good. Then she walked back toward the house to get camera ready. I opened the bag. Inside were several packages of beef, the kind with bright yellow stickers on the front that said, "Manager's Special" in bold letters with "Sell by Today" printed directly beneath. $3.99 per pound. I counted 7 packages. There were also 2 bottles of the store brand barbecue sauce, the ones that live on the bottom shelf, and a bag of paper plates. I set everything out on the prep table beside the grill. Then I began peeling stickers, carefully, methodically, the way I do most things. There were a great many stickers. My hands, after more than a week of cold shed mornings, were not as nimble as they once were. I did my best. Sandra Hargrove arrived at noon in pressed linen and a tennis bracelet, followed by 6 women who had the particular polished ease of Pasadena mothers, who'd never once questioned whether their luncheon invitations would be accepted. Kendra greeted them in the backyard in a floral-wrapped dress phone discreetly positioned on the patio table to capture the scene. "You are all so sweet to come," she said, pouring sparkling water into glasses. "I wanted to do something meaningful. I actually sourced the beef from a premium organic ranch in Ventura County. Grass-fed, no hormones. Farm to table all the way." Sandra Hargrove made an appreciative sound and accepted a plate. I served from the grill, moving plate to plate, tongs in hand. Everything looked fine. Everything smelled fine. The afternoon light was golden over the bougainvillea along the back fence, and for 20 minutes the gathering had the pleasant humming quality of exactly what Kendra needed it to be. Then Sandra Hargrove set her fork down. She reached under the edge of her plate and pinched something between 2 fingers, a small rectangle of bright yellow paper that had somehow migrated from a packaging fold and adhered itself to the underside of the serving dish. She held it up and read it aloud, not loudly but clearly enough. "Manager's Special. Clearance. Sell by today. $3.99 per pound." The table went very quiet. Sandra looked at Kendra. Kendra looked at Sandra. The other 6 women looked at their plates with the studied neutrality of people recalibrating everything they had just eaten. I set down the tongs, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and picked up the Costco bag I had folded and kept beside the grill all afternoon. I walked toward Tristan, who was standing near the back door holding a glass of iced tea, and wishing I suspected that he were somewhere else entirely. "Honey," I said, holding out the bag so that the remaining stickers were clearly visible to everyone at the table. "Next time Kendra picks up clearance meat like this, remind her to pull off all the stickers first. I was peeling them in the shed all morning and my hands got tired. Looks like I missed one. Sorry about that." Tristan's face went the color of uncooked dough. Sandra Hargrove placed her napkin on the table, folded it once, and reached for her handbag. Sandra Hargrove left at 12:41. She did not say goodbye to Kendra directly. She touched my arm as she passed. The grill said, "Thank you for the food, Rowena," in a tone that managed to be both polite and perfectly final, and walked through the side gate without looking back. The other 6 mothers followed in the particular formation of women who have collectively decided something and do not need to discuss it out loud. The backyard was empty by 12:50. Kendra stood in the middle of the patio surrounded by half-eaten plates and untouched sparkling water, her wrap dress suddenly looking less intentional and more like something she had grabbed in a hurry. Her jaw was working the way it did when she was processing something she refused to say. Tristan collected plates with his eyes fixed on the table surface, moving with the careful energy of a man trying very hard not to exist. "You did that on purpose," Kendra said. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the empty chairs. "I told you my hands were tired," I said. She picked up a glass and set it down again hard enough to slosh the sparkling water over the rim. Then she walked inside and closed the door with the measured restraint of someone saving the real reaction for later. I finished cleaning the grill. Tristan carried the last of the plates past me and stopped. For a moment, he stood there with a stack of paper plates in his hands and something unfinished moving across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite courage, but the uncomfortable territory directly between them. "Mom," he started. "Go inside, Tristan," I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. He went. I folded the prep table, stored the grill cover, and walked back to the shed with the same unhurried step I had used all afternoon. Maggie Carroll was in her front garden when I rounded the corner of the house, deadheading roses, with a focused attention that did not quite conceal the fact that she had been watching the side gate for the last 20 minutes. "Sandra texted the group chat," she said without looking up from the roses. "I imagine she did," I said. 32 responses in 4 minutes. Maggie snipped a dead bloom with precision. The words "Organic and Ranch" were used sarcastically, multiple times. I allowed myself a small smile. "How's your leg?" she asked. "Better than it was on Thursday," I said. She looked up, then directly at me with the clear-eyed steadiness of a woman who had lived next door to this property for 22 years and understood exactly what was happening inside it. "You're not just visiting, are you?" she said. It was not a question. "No," I said, "I'm not." She nodded, once returned to her roses, and said nothing further, which was, I had come to understand Maggie Carroll's particular way of saying she was on my side. I went back to the shed, sat on the edge of the mattress, and thought about Tristan's face when Sandra read that sticker aloud, that almost something moving across his features. Not quite guilt, not quite courage. Not yet, but getting there. Before I show you what fell out of that old suitcase and stop Tristan cold comment the word shed right now, so I know you are still here with me. What happens next is something Kendra never saw coming. Neither will you. Note portions of this story include fictional elements added for depth and entertainment. If that is not for you, this is a good place to step away, and that is perfectly okay. I had been back in the shed for 20 minutes when I heard him coming. Not Kendra's sharp, deliberate heel strike. Tristan's footsteps were heavier and less certain, the sound of a man who has just read something on his phone that has taken the structural integrity out of his legs. He knocked once, which he had not done before, and pushed the door open without waiting for an answer. His face was the color of old chalk. He was still holding his phone screen facing out as though the email on it were evidence he needed a witness for. "Mom." His voice cracked on the single syllable. "The bank sent a notice. The Mercedes, I'm 2 months behind and they're moving to repossess. I need $5,000 by end of business today or they send a truck." He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, the way he used to do as a boy when he was trying not to cry in front of me. I know I have no right to ask. I know that. But I didn't know where else to go. I looked at my son standing in the doorway of a shed he had put me in, asking me for money he believed I didn't have, with his hand pressed against his mouth and his eyes red at the rims. I thought about James. About the way James used to say that the most clarifying thing in the world is watching someone ask you for help they think you cannot give. "Let me see what I have," I said. I reached for the third suitcase, the oldest one with the broken zipper pull I had never replaced. I unzipped the main compartment and began moving things aside slowly, the way a woman with arthritic fingers moves through a bag she has packed and repacked 100 times. I had texted Gary Sutton 11 minutes ago, "Call me back in 15 minutes. Use the speaker function." It was not coincidence. I had been carrying that text drafted and unsent for 2 days, waiting for the right moment, the moment when Tristan came to me, not as Kendra's husband managing a situation, but as my son alone, asking for something with his hand pressed against his mouth, the way he had done since he was 8 years old. That was the moment I had been waiting to answer. The black card slipped out from between a folded cardigan and a travel document wallet and landed on the shed floor between us with a quiet, definitive sound. Matty black. Caldwell embossed in silver along the lower edge. Diamond tier. No spending limit. Tristan stared at it. He did not pick it up. He stared at it the way you stare at something that has rearranged every assumption you were operating on. My phone rang. I answered and set it on the prep table beside me, speaker on. "Mrs. Caldwell." Gary Sutton's voice filled the shed, warm and businesslike. "The rent collection cleared on all 5 properties this morning. We're sitting at $80,200 for the month. Which account would you like me to move it to?" The shed was very quiet except for Gary's voice and the distant sound of Kendra filming something inside the house, completely unaware that nearly 2 weeks of careful planning had just arrived at this exact moment. I picked up the black card from the floor and slipped it back into the cardigan fold. "I'll call you back this afternoon, Gary. Thank you." I ended the call and looked at Tristan. His mouth was open. His eyes were wet. His hand had dropped from his face and was hanging at his side, slightly open, the way hands go when the body forgets what it was doing. "Mom," he said. The word came out stripped of everything except the word itself. "I know," I said. He came back 2 hours later with a pillow under one arm and a folded quilt under the other, the good one, the cream-colored one, from the guest bedroom that Kendra had described when I first arrived as a $200 purchase from a boutique in Silver Lake. He knocked properly this time. Waited. "Come in," I said. Tristan stepped into the shed with the careful movements of a man navigating unfamiliar moral territory. He set the pillow on the mattress and held out the quilt with both hands, the way you offer something to a person you have wronged and cannot yet find the words for. "It gets cold in here at night," he said. His voice was steadier than it had been 2 hours ago, but his eyes were still doing the thing they did when he was carrying something too large for his chest. "It does," I agreed. He sat down on an overturned storage crate and looked at his hands. "I didn't tell Kendra I was coming out here. She thinks I'm on a work call." "I know," I said. He looked up sharply. "How did you—" "Tristan." I said his name the way I had said it since he was 4 years old and caught in something he thought he'd hidden. "I have known you your entire life." He almost smiled. Then the almost smile collapsed into something more honest and considerably more painful. He pressed both palms against his knees and drew a breath. "Mom, I need you to know that I—" The phone in his pocket buzzed, then buzzed again, then began ringing outright Kendra's name, lighting up the screen. He answered it, put it to his ear. What happened next was not something I planned precisely. I had simply forgotten genuinely for one moment that my phone was connected to the Caldwell Property Group's smart home system, of which I was the administrative account holder, and that the outdoor speaker panel on the back patio wall was set to ambient mode. I reached for my phone to check a message from Dennis, and my thumb, moving on instinct, made contact with the wrong icon. The outdoor speakers activated. Kendra's voice filled the entire backyard at a volume that carried cleanly over the fence line and into the quiet of the early evening. "Where are you? What are you doing out in that disgusting shed?" Tell that broke old woman to get up and go clean the bird poop off the back patio. That is what she is here for." Tristan went absolutely rigid. From beyond the oleander hedge, I heard footsteps slow and stop. Maggie Carroll, returning from her evening walk with two neighbors, stood on the sidewalk in the particular stillness of people who have heard something they were not meant to hear and are deciding what to do with it. Tristan ended the call. His face had moved through several things and arrived somewhere I had not seen before. Not embarrassment, not anger, but a raw, clarifying shame that had no comfortable place to land. He stood up, set the empty crate aside. "Get some sleep, Mom," he said, his voice low and stripped of everything decorative. "I'll figure something out." He walked back toward the house without the quilt. I folded it carefully and placed it over the mattress. Through the window, I watched his shadow cross the kitchen and stop. Just stop. Standing still in the light for a long moment before he moved again. I was not in the room when it happened. I am telling this part the way Tristan told it to me later. Not that night, but after everything was done, sitting at the kitchen counter of the penthouse with his hands around a cup of coffee he had stopped drinking 20 minutes earlier. He told me this was the night before the gala, the night he stopped pretending he did not already know. He had gone back inside and stood in the kitchen for a long time, long enough for the refrigerator to cycle twice before he moved to the bedroom. Kendra was in the bathroom with the door closed and the shower running. Her Apple Watch sat on the corner of the desk where she always left it before bed, face up, screen dark. It lit up at 9:47, a notification. Uber receipt, trip completed, pick up Pasadena Hills, drop off Malibu Coast Resort, and spa. Tristan stared at it. Kendra had told him she was working from home all day. She had not left the house. She had been right there filming on calls, managing the fallout from the live stream disaster. She had not gone anywhere near Malibu. He picked up the iPad from the nightstand, their shared device synced to the same Apple account, and opened the travel app. His hands were steady. He told me later that his hands were completely steady, which surprised him because his chest felt like something inside it had been taken hold of and was being slowly compressed. The folder was labeled Media Projects. Inside were 14 calendar entries spanning 11 months. Hotel reservations, always the same two names, always a king room. The locations rotated Santa Monica, Malibu, Ojai, once a resort in Scottsdale, but the pattern was consistent, and the timestamps were meticulous, the way Kendra was meticulous about everything she considered important. The financial records were worse. 31 transfers from their joint checking account to an account registered to Derek Holt described in the memo field as media consulting fee. The amounts ranged from $1,500 to $4,200. The total when Tristan added them in his head came to somewhere above $50,000. $50,000 of their shared money moved without discussion, without agreement, to a man whose name appeared 14 times in a hidden hotel calendar. Under California Family Code Section 2602, the deliberate waste or misuse of marital assets, money spent on an extramarital relationship without the other spouse's knowledge, can be considered dissipation of community property. A court can account for it when dividing assets in a divorce. It does not have to be hidden to count. It simply has to be gone. Tristan photographed everything, methodically screen by screen, the way his father used to document a job site before work began, because you always record the condition of things before you change them. Then he called Brian Kowalski, a friend from law school who now practiced family law in Glendale. He had thought about calling Dennis first, but Dennis was my attorney, had always been my attorney. And Tristan understood, perhaps for the first time, that in this particular situation, my interests and his were not the same thing. He needed someone who was entirely his. Brian Kowalski had been his roommate for 2 years in law school and had never once billed him for a phone call. That counted for something at midnight. Brian answered on the third ring and listened without interrupting. "Document everything," Brian said when Tristan finished. "Don't move any money, don't confront her yet, and call me first thing tomorrow." Tristan set the iPad face down on the desk. The shower was still running. He walked out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and out the back door into the night air. He stood in the yard for a long moment, looking at the shed, the thin line of light visible under the door where I had left the lamp on. Then he went back inside. I had not planned to sleep that night. Not because I was frightened, because I had placed a single sheet of paper on the small table beside my lamp before I lay down an old bank statement from an account James and I had closed in 2019, with a routing number and account number clearly visible at the top. Bait set with the same quiet deliberateness that James used to set things he wanted found. I turned off the lamp at 11 and lay in the dark and waited. The footsteps came at 12:34, not Tristan's heavy, uncertain tread. These were careful and slow, the footsteps of someone who had decided to do something they knew was wrong and had committed to doing it anyway. I heard the shed door handle turn with agonizing slowness, felt the draft of cold air as the door opened just wide enough for a body to slip through. I closed my eyes, kept my breathing slow and even. Kendra moved through the shed in short, careful increments, the beam of her phone flashlight sweeping low across the floor. I could hear her breathing shallow and fast, the breathing of someone whose heart rate had already made the decision that her brain was still catching up to. She moved past the foot of the mattress, past the storage crates, toward the small table where the lamp sat and the bank statement waited in plain sight. I let her get close. Then I rolled over. I put everything I had into it, a full-body shift, the kind that makes an old folding bed frame speak loudly and at length. The metal legs scraped concrete, the frame shuddered, and I added a cough, deep and sudden, the kind that comes from somewhere below the chest. The sound Kendra made was involuntary and immediate, a sharp, bitten-off gasp. I heard her stumble her hip, connecting with the edge of the table, with a solid, painful sound, and then the rapid, graceless scramble of someone moving toward a door as fast as their body would carry them without actually running. The shed door swung shut. I counted to 30. Then I sat up, turned on the lamp, and looked at the concrete floor beside the overturned storage crate near the door. A phone. Slim in a dark case screen, dark. It had landed in the folds of an old moving blanket I kept folded by the entrance. I heard footsteps crossing the yard outside, heavier this time, deliberate. A knock. "Come in," I said. Tristan stepped inside. He'd been outside the whole time. He looked at me, looked at the phone on the floor, crouched down and picked it up without touching the screen. The display lit up with a notification. A voice message. The sender was listed under a name that was not a name, just 2 letters. D.H. Tristan pressed play. Derek Holt's voice came out of the speaker with the relaxed confidence of a man who had no idea his voice was about to become evidence. "I am already at the Hotel Babe, room 402. Come early tomorrow, I have been waiting." Tristan straightened up slowly. His jaw was set in a way I recognized the same line his father's jaw made when James Caldwell had made up his mind about something and the discussion was finished. He took out his own phone and recorded every second of the screen. Then he looked at me and his eyes were dry and very clear. "Get some sleep, Mom," he said. "I'll handle it from here." I heard her at 5:23 in the morning, the particular sound of someone moving through a house with urgency they are trying to disguise as calm. Drawers opening, closing, the muffled sound of cushions being lifted and replaced, then unmistakably the back door handle rattling once, twice, 3 times with increasing force. The smart lock held. Kendra had never needed to override it. She'd always come and gone before 10 and after 7. Until last night. The Caldwell Property Group smart home system, which I administered from the same account that received Gary Sutton's monthly reports, had been set to restrict external door access between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. since the day I moved in. A security feature, standard for any property under active management. Kendra had never thought to ask whose name was on the administrative account. I dressed slowly in the shed, listening to the morning settle around me. Birds in the oleanders, A sprinkler system, 2 houses down, cycling through its program. The distant sound of the 5:45 Foothill Transit bus making its first run along Rosemead Boulevard. At 6:15, I made tea. At 6:52, I heard Tristan's voice outside calm, carrying the voice of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say and had decided to mean every word of it. I moved to the shed's small side window. Tristan stood on the front path in a clean shirt, his posture straight in a way I had not seen in years. Beside him stood a HOA security officer, a compact, observant woman whose badge read T. Vasquez, and 2 community patrol officers in their standard gray uniforms. Kendra had come around the side of the house in yesterday's clothes, her hair not yet done her face, moving rapidly through expressions she could not quite get under control. Tristan held up the slim, dark phone. "Someone entered the shed where my mother sleeps last night and left this behind," he said, his voice level and unhurried. "The screen keeps receiving messages from what appears to be a hotel booking. I would like to request a review of the neighborhood security camera footage to identify whoever accessed my mother's space without her permission." Kendra's face went the color of old concrete. Officer Vasquez made a note on her tablet. The neighborhood security cameras mounted at 3 points along the block perimeter, maintained by the HOA, would show exactly who had crossed the backyard at 12:34 in the morning. They would show it clearly with a timestamp in high definition. Kendra's mouth opened. "That is—" Her voice came out wrong, too high and too fast. She stopped, started again. "That is actually my phone. I mean, it belongs to a friend. She must have dropped it when she stopped by last night to check on my mother-in-law." Officer Vasquez looked at her, looked at the phone, made another note. "So you're claiming this device," she said. "Yes." Kendra reached for it with a hand that was not entirely steady. "Yes." "I'm sorry for the confusion." Tristan handed it over without expression. Through the shed window, I raised my tea mug and took a slow, deliberate sip. Maggie Carroll materialized at the edge of the front path in her walking shoes, right on schedule, with the alert stillness of a woman who had absolutely not set her alarm for 6:45, specifically to be present for this moment. She caught my eye through the window. I raised the mug slightly higher. The dress had been in the bottom of the 3rd suitcase the entire time. Navy silk floor length with a structured bodice that James had always said made me look like someone who owned the room before she walked into it. I had packed it deliberately the way I had packed everything because I knew when the moment came I would need to be ready for it. Dennis texted at 6:15. "Car is outside. Victor confirmed for tomorrow. Everything is in position." I read the message, set my phone down, and finished my earrings. The driver, a quietly efficient man named Paul, who had worked for the Caldwell Property Group for 9 years, held the car door without comment. He had driven me to board meetings, to closings, to the hospital the morning James died. He understood that some car rides do not require conversation. We pulled out of the Pasadena Hills neighborhood at 6:32. As we turned onto the main road, I caught a glimpse through the rear window of Kendra standing on the front steps in a sequined dress. Derek Holt's hand at the small of her back, watching a separate car pull away from the curb. She had used his event ticket. Dennis had a contact on the gala's guest services team, a former client who owed him a courtesy, and had asked that afternoon whether a Kendra Morrison or Kendra Caldwell appeared on the evening's registration list. She did, under Derek Holt's company table allocation. She believed she was walking into a room full of opportunity. She was not wrong about that. The event was held at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, a building that understood in its bones what it meant to project permanence. Grand ballroom, 12-foot floral arrangements, the kind of lighting that makes everyone look like a better version of themselves. I had attended this particular gala 4 times with James, twice without him, and once as a keynote sponsor when the foundation had underwritten the evening's charitable component. Tonight, we were gold sponsor. I arrived at 7:04 and was escorted directly to the VIP reception room, where Dennis was waiting with a glass of sparkling water and the expression of a man who had been practicing law for 30 years and still occasionally allowed himself to enjoy the architecture of a well-executed plan. "She's here," he said quietly. "Table 11, near the service corridor." "I know," I said. "I saw her on the way in." At 7:22, the MC, a polished man in his 50s who projected warmth the way a well-maintained radiator projects heat, stepped to the podium and began the evening's acknowledgments. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Los Angeles Business Leadership Gala is proud to recognize our gold sponsor for this evening chair of the Caldwell Family Foundation, a pillar of this community for over 2 decades, and someone whose commitment to this city's future speaks for itself. Please welcome Mrs. Rowena Caldwell." I set my sparkling water down on the side table. I walked out from the VIP room into the ballroom. The applause began before I reached the podium, the warm, genuine, full-room applause of people who know exactly who they are clapping for. I accepted it with a nod the way James had taught me. Not a bow, a nod. From across the room at table 11 near the service corridor, I could see Kendra's face. She had gone completely still. Beside her, Derek Holt straightened in his chair with the slow, dawning tension of a man whose evening had just changed shape in a way he had not anticipated and could not yet fully calculate. I walked to the podium, smiled at the room, and thought about what I was going to say to both of them very shortly and very quietly on my way back to my seat. Table 11 was positioned with the particular precision of someone who had not chosen it close enough to the service corridor that the kitchen sounds occasionally drifted through, far enough from the center of the room to communicate without saying so directly that the people sitting there were not quite the point of the evening. Kendra had rearranged the centerpiece. Of course she had. She was sitting with her shoulders back and her chin at the angle she used when she needed a room to believe she belonged in it. Her sequined dress, catching the light in a way that would have photographed beautifully if anyone had been pointing a camera at her. Derek Holt sat beside her with his jacket open and his hand around a whiskey glass, his earlier tension smoothed back into the practiced ease of a man who had decided the situation was still manageable. He revised that opinion approximately 4 seconds after I stopped at their table. "Mr. Holt," I said. I did not look at Kendra first. That was intentional. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Rowena Caldwell, chair of the Caldwell Family Foundation, which has served as the primary funding source for your gym expansion project for the past 18 months. Derek Holt set his whiskey glass down. "The foundation's board met last week." I continued my voice, the same tone I used in every board meeting I had ever run, calm, precise, leaving no space for interruption. "We completed a compliance review of all active grant commitments. I wanted to inform you personally that the board has voted to withdraw the foundation's full $2 million investment from your project effective immediately. Our legal team identified financial irregularities in the project accounts that we are unable to overlook. You will receive formal written notice by Monday morning." The written notice, Dennis had assured me, had already been drafted and was waiting only for this conversation to conclude. Derek Holt's face did not collapse. It evacuated color expression, the easy confidence of 30 seconds ago, all of it departing with the speed of a man recalculating every assumption he had made about this evening and arriving at a number he did not like. He stood up. He did not say goodbye to Kendra. He did not excuse himself or offer an explanation. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, with one hand touched nothing else at the table, and walked toward the exit, with the particular momentum of someone who needs to make several phone calls before anyone else does. Kendra reached out and her fingers closed on empty air. She sat very still for a moment, her hand still extended toward the space where Derek Holt had been. Then she pulled it back into her lap. Her sequined dress caught the light. The kitchen sounds drifted through from the service corridor. At the surrounding tables, conversations continued with the practiced smoothness of people who had noticed everything and would discuss it thoroughly later. I looked at Kendra directly for the first time since I had stopped at the table. Her eyes were bright, not with tears not yet, but with the specific, frantic brightness of someone whose plan has just left the building and taken every contingency with it. "He was never going to stay," I said quietly. "Not for you, not for anyone." Men like that are only ever passing through." I did not wait for her to respond. I walked back to the VIP section, sat down, and picked up my sparkling water. Dennis leaned over from the adjacent seat. "Clean," he said simply. "It needed to be," I said. My phone lit up with a text from Victor Reyes confirmed for tomorrow evening. All documents prepared. I set the phone face down and watched the rest of the gala with the particular quiet of a woman who has one more thing left to do. Before I reveal what Victor Reyes pulled out of that briefcase and what Tristan placed on the table that made Kendra's knees buckle, comment "justice" below, so I know you stayed this far. What happens in the next few minutes is what this entire story has been building toward. A gentle reminder, this story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. If you would prefer to step away now, we completely understand. I was told she walked through the front door at 10:12 still in the sequined dress with the particular posture of a woman who has spent 3 hours holding herself together in public and is now one threshold away from letting go. She did not get the chance. Tristan was sitting in the living room, her studio, the room she had taken from me on that first Thursday in the armchair nearest the window, his jacket off his sleeves rolled to the elbow. Beside him on the coffee table sat a neat stack of folders. Across from him sat 2 men she had never met. Victor Reyes introduced himself first. 50 years old, silver at the temples, the unhurried manner of someone who delivers difficult information for a living and has long since stopped apologizing for its content. "Ms. Morrison," he said, using her maiden name, which was the name on the legal documents. "I represent Caldwell Property Group, LLC, of which Mrs. Rowena Caldwell is the sole managing member. I'm here to inform you that this property, 247 Oleander Drive, Pasadena, is owned entirely by the LLC. You and your husband have been tenants here at a significantly reduced rate as a family accommodation." Kendra opened her mouth. Victor continued without pause. "You are currently 3 months in arrears on rent. A 3-day notice to pay or quit was legally served to Mr. Tristan Caldwell 11 days ago in accordance with California Civil Code Section 1161. That notice expired at midnight tonight. The LLC is prepared to proceed with formal unlawful detainer proceedings as of tomorrow morning." He set a copy of the notice on the coffee table beside the folders, face up, dated and signed. However, voluntary vacating of the premises this evening would eliminate the need for court involvement. The color left Kendra's face in a single visible wave, starting at her forehead and moving downward like something being erased. "This is my house," she said. Her voice came out cracked at the edges, stripped of every layer of professional finish she had spent 11 days maintaining. "Tristan, tell them this is our house." Tristan looked at her steadily. He reached forward and picked up the second folder from the coffee table. He opened it and placed it in front of her item by item without rushing. 14 hotel reservation confirmations, 31 bank transfer records, Derek Holt's name repeated across every page, the voice recording from the shed transcribed and dated. Then the divorce petition already filed with the Los Angeles Superior Court that afternoon, Brian Kowalski's firm stamp on the cover page. Brian had e-filed it that afternoon through the California Court's electronic filing system, a process that does not require the courthouse to be open, only the internet to be running and the paperwork to be in order. Both conditions had been met by 3 p.m. "The transfers from our joint account to Derek Holt total $53,400, Tristan said. His voice was quiet and entirely without anger, which was somehow worse than anger would have been. Under California Family Code Section 2602, the court will treat that as dissipation of community property. Brian has already submitted the documentation." Kendra's knees buckled. She caught herself on the arm of the sofa, her fingers white against the upholstery, her breath coming in shallow, audible pulls that she could not quite get under control. The sequins on her dress caught the lamplight and scattered it uselessly across the ceiling. "I have nowhere to go," she said. The performance was completely gone. What was left was just a woman in a dress that no longer fit the moment, saying the only true thing she had said in 11 days. Brian Kowalski leaned forward and slid one final document across the table. "You have until 7 a.m., he said. I came back to the house at 11:45, not through the front door, through the side gate, the way I had been coming and going for 11 days with my key card and my bruised shin, and whatever remained of my patience. Paul was parked at the curb with the engine running and the rear door open. He had been waiting since 11:15. He did not check his watch when I appeared. That is the kind of man Paul is. I had already packed. The 3 suitcases were standing upright beside the shed door, exactly where they had stood 11 days ago when Tristan unloaded them from his SUV, with his jaw set and his cologne fresh, and his absolute certainty that everything was going to be fine. I carried them out one at a time. On my second trip, I heard the front door open. Kendra came down the porch steps in bare feet, the sequined dress replaced by sweatpants and a pullover, her face unmade, her hair pulled back with the kind of carelessness that only happens when a person has stopped thinking about how they look. She crossed the yard toward me with an unsteadiness in her step that had nothing to do with the uneven flagstones. She stopped 6 feet away. "Please." Her voice came out raw and low-scraped clean of every register she had ever used with me. The warm, professional tone, the managed concern, the brittle efficiency. What was left was just a voice. "I know I was wrong, I know what I did, but I have nowhere to go tonight and I am asking you—" Her throat closed around the next word and she had to push through it. "Please." I set the 3rd suitcase down. I looked at Kendra for a long moment, at the bare feet on the cold flagstones, at the hands she had pressed together in front of her chest, at the face that was finally, completely, entirely her own. Then I picked the suitcase back up. Victor Reyes stood on the porch behind her, folder in hand, patient as a man who has learned that these moments take exactly as long as they take. The HOA officer, R. Goodwin, the same man who had handed Kendra the $500 citation 2 days ago, stood at the side gate with the particular stillness of someone whose job is to witness and not to intervene. Across the street, Maggie Carroll's porch light was on. It had been on since 11. I did not look over. I did not need to. I walked to where Kendra was standing. I stopped close enough that she would hear me clearly and quietly without anyone else needing to. "There is an old mattress in that shed," I said. My voice was the same tone I had used every day of the past 11 days, steady, unhurried, entirely without performance. "Fresh air. You will not be dirtying up anyone's hardwood floors. And you came here with nothing." I paused. "Having a roof over your head at all should feel like a blessing." Kendra's face crumpled. Not dramatically, not with the managed emotion of a live stream. It crumpled the way faces do when the last thing holding them in shape finally gives way quietly, completely, without an audience in mind. I carried my 3rd suitcase to the car. Paul loaded all 3 into the trunk with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. I got into the back seat. Through the window, I could see Tristan standing alone on the top porch step, his hands in his pockets, his head slightly bowed. The posture of a man standing inside a consequence he had built himself and was only now understanding the full dimensions of. I reached forward and touched the glass between us. Paul pulled away from the curb. The drive to the penthouse took 22 minutes. I know because I counted them, not anxiously, not with impatience, but the way you count the last steps of a very long walk, marking them, being present for the end of one thing and the beginning of something else. Tristan sat beside me in the back seat and did not speak for the first 14 minutes. I did not fill the space. Some silences between a mother and her son do not need filling. They need to be sat in, felt through, allowed to mean what they mean. At minute 15, he said, "I saw the light under the shed door every night." "I know," I said. I told myself it was temporary. His voice was low and rough at the edges, the voice of a man who had not slept and was not trying to hide it. I walked past that door every single night, and I told myself you were fine, that it was just for a little while. He pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment, the same gesture he had used as a boy, the one that meant he was fighting something he could not quite hold back. I knew you weren't fine. I just needed it to be temporary more than I needed to tell the truth. I reached over and placed my hand over his fist. He did not pull away. He turned his hand over and held on. We rode the rest of the way like that, his hand in mine, the city lights of Los Angeles, moving past the windows, the gas stations, and the palm trees, and the lit windows of 10,000 apartments where 10,000 ordinary lives were quietly continuing indifferent to everything that had happened on Oleander Drive this week. Paul pulled up to the building on Figueroa at 12:31. The doorman, a young man I did not recognize the building's night staff, having changed 3 times since James and I first moved in, held the lobby door with the careful courtesy that tall buildings train into their people. The lobby was exactly as I remembered. Marble floors the color of old cream, the long front desk, the brass elevator doors that James had always said were the best thing about the building. I stood in front of those doors for a moment. Tristan stood beside me looking up at them the way his father used to look at things he had not expected to find beautiful. He found this place driving past one morning, I said. Called me from the car to describe it. I told him he was being dramatic. Was he? Always, I said. About the things he loved. The elevator opened. We rode up to the 14th floor without speaking, and that was all right, because the silence this time was a different kind. Not the silence of things unsaid, but the silence of 2 people who have said enough for one night and are ready finally to rest. I made coffee in the kitchen the way James always made it, badly enthusiastically, with entirely too much ground coffee and not enough patience for the process. I set a cup in front of Tristan at the kitchen counter and stood across from him with my own. He looked around the penthouse, the riverstone floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the reading chair by the east window that had always been mine. "Mom," he said, "I am sorry, not to fix anything, not to ask for anything. Just I am sorry." I looked at my son, at the jaw that was James's, and the eyes that were his own, and the particular slump of his shoulders that meant he was carrying something he had not yet put down. "I know," I said. "That's where we start." He nodded, wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Outside the windows, Los Angeles was beginning its slow, indifferent, magnificent return to morning, the sky lightening at its eastern edge. The city below still moving, still breathing entirely unconcerned with the specific grief and grace of one family finding its way back to something true. I stood at the window with my terrible coffee and watched the city wake up, and for the first time in 11 days, I felt exactly like myself. I have thought about what I would say to a woman sitting where I once sat in the cold and the dark, wondering if the people who were supposed to love her actually did. Here is what I know now. God does not waste our pain. Every night in that shed taught me something I could not have learned any other way, that real love does not come with conditions, and real dignity cannot be taken from you. It can only be surrendered. Do not surrender yours. If you are caught inside a family drama that is slowly making you smaller, leave before it costs you everything. That is my personal opinion, and I will not soften it. Every family drama has a turning point. Find yours before someone else finds it for you. Revenge stories with mom like mine are not stories anyone plans to live, but when you live them, you discover what you are truly made of. I discovered I was made of considerably more than anyone in that house anticipated. So are you. These revenge stories with mom that break us open are also the ones that show us where our real strength lives. And every family drama reminds us, dignity is never for sale. If this revenge stories with mom found something true in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, subscribe for more stories like this one. We will be here. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. A gentle note. Stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and meaningful storytelling. If this one is not the right fit for you, we respect that completely. Something else may serve you better.